Do you want to meet a ghost?
Do you want to meet a ghost?
Do you want to meet a ghost? Do you want to meet a ghost?
I'm Emily.
And I'm Chelsea.
We're two lifelong horror fans.
Here to discuss old favorites and discover new ones.
We summarize the whole movie.
Spoilers and all.
Do you want to meet a ghost?
Let's press play. Today we are discussing the movie House of Wax from 2005. The director of this movie is Jaume Collet-Serra. It's written by Carrie and Chad Hayes, and it stars some well-known actors such as Paris Hilton, Jared Padalecki, Chad Michael Murray, and so on.
Wait, let me stop you for a second.
Sure.
Did you say is it written by twins?
It is written by twins.
Both
yep. I knew they were
wrote...
brothers, but I didn't know they were twins.
Wow. I thought it was just one twin. I didn't know both of them wrote it together. That's a little more weird.
Oh no, I thought that was so cool. Like those writers, they also wrote The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 together. They were both in the 1986 movie Rad, which is like a BMX movie. And then one was in the movie Death Spa, which is this like throwaway slasher that takes place at a gym spa, which I think is really funny that one of them was in there. But yeah, this movie deals with twins, two sets of twins, was written by twins. Lots of twinning happening here.
Yes.
My experience with this movie is I remember seeing it shortly after it came out. Like, this movie was marketed hard.
Yeah.
It was really marketed through like MTV, through all these avenues. They had a lot of press on it. Of course, like the main attraction was Paris Hilton.
It depends on who you ask, because the main attraction to me was My Chemical Romance.
No, and that was mine too. I think that's a big reason why this was on my radar, because I knew that they had a My Chemical Romance song in the credits.
Oh, yeah.
And that was enough to get us, as young teenagers, get us to see this movie, House of Wax. I remember seeing it back in the day and like thinking it was fine, but it wasn't until the past couple years that I revisited it, and I just really, really appreciated it. I love this movie. I think it is the best.
Yeah, no joke.
It's definitely one of my favorites. So what's your like experience with it? Like, do you remember like seeing it in the theater or anything?
I remember seeing it in the theaters, and I think like the general consensus at the time was like, it's okay. It's nothing special.
It wasn't something that people loved, I feel.
No, it definitely was like under the radar. It wasn't that popular. I think maybe some people like went into the movie wanting to hate it because like hating, like hating on reality TV stars was big thing back then, especially Paris, because she did the whole like ditzy blonde thing. And this character that we know now that it's a character that she portrayed, and I think a lot of people may have just wrote this movie off as like, oh, whatever, it's just like a gimmicky kind of movie with a big name.
Right.
It's kind of become more and more popular as time went on. It's just one of those movies that people didn't really appreciate until maybe
and then
like
they revisit.
Yeah, like maybe 10 plus years after it came out, and then you're like, well, actually, this movie's really good.
Like, it did pretty good in theaters. It made twice its budget, but then that has no reflection, obviously, on how much people liked it. Obviously, this movie was marketing to get you into the seat.
Oh, yeah.
Did you like it? Did you not like it? I don't know, but it did do well at the theater overall, but it kind of does seem like a throwaway movie that people were like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, like, it's like, oh, I'll just watch it one time at the theater, maybe not buy the DVD or rewatch it again.
People always mention how this is a, quote, remake of House of Wax 1953, and if you've ever seen it, if anybody's ever seen it, you know that it's really not. Not like that House of Wax at all. It's more close to the movie Tourist Trap, which I believe is 1979, which is one of my favorite movies, but that at least has young people on a road trip that get stranded at a wax museum, which is much closer to this plot than the plot of that.
And I also think they were kind of going for a Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake vibe, because that came out right before this, and that was a huge success.
There were a couple nods I felt to Texas Chainsaw. Like, we'll go over them more later, but
yeah,
in the tow truck driver's car, there's like bones hanging from the ceiling, which kind of reminds me of like Leatherface's house. The main character, Carly, at one point, like, a villain's trying to get her from outside the pickup truck, so she crawls through the window to the bed of the pickup truck, and I'm like, Sally Hardesty, just like in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I felt like they were a little bit of a nod
Absolutely. Even Carly's outfit was just like the white wife beater with the jeans. I'm pretty sure that's what Jessica Biel wore in the remake.
Oh, wow. I haven't seen the remake in a number of years.
It really isn't a remake of the 1953 movie. The 1953 movie is a remake of the 1932 movie. Those two movies are
the rabbit hole deepens.
Yeah, we went down such a rabbit hole. But I didn't even know there was a 1932 movie until I started researching for this episode. So that was a really fun rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, definitely not. Definitely.
And that's called Mystery at the Wax Museum?
Mystery of the Wax Museum.
Okay, yeah. And I think that was 1933.
1933, yeah, probably. I don't know, I have 32 in my notes, I might be wrong.
Oh, okay, well, I mean, close enough.
Somewhere around there. You're probably right. That actually ended up being one of my favorites from this whole rabbit hole. I can get into that later.
There's, I also noted in our because I made a little supplementary watch list. You guys out there can participate in our rabbit hole too. So a couple of things. So there's Mystery of the Wax Museum 33, House of Wax 54, Tourist Trap 79. I also recommend, but it is not a hard recommend, but at the MTV House of Wax documentary, it was called MTV Movie Life, whatever. I found it on YouTube where somebody had recorded it on a tape from their TV and then put it on YouTube.
Bless them for that.
Yes, bless them. And to cut the commercials out. No commercials in it, which was great. Yeah. Half of that runtime is movie stuff. The other half is them trying to make a reality show about what Chad Michael Murray and Paris Hilton are doing. And it's annoying. It's not great, but that has some really interesting stuff about making the movie in it.
It's got a very nostalgia feel as far as if you liked if you liked reality TV from MTV in the early 2000s, you're probably gonna like that little series they did.
There's also the movie Waxwork, as well as Waxwork 2, which takes place in a wax museum. Not similar to any of these, but just another wax museum movie. In that movie, it's a group of young people end up at a wax museum. The main character is the guy from the Gremlins. They kind of fall into the wax dioramas and then fall into a story. It's kind of a horror comedy, it's a lighthearted thing. I also recommend that for anybody out there looking for another wax museum-based movie.
I haven't seen that one in a while. Is that one kind of anthology style?
It is, because there's a different story whenever they fall into the wax thing.
Oh, yeah. I love those kind of things.
I also recommend the episode of the Supernatural TV show. I think it's episode 5 from season 5. It's called Fallen Idols. It came out in 2009. For those of you that are not familiar with Supernatural, which hopefully you're at least a little bit familiar with it, because Jared Padalecki from this movie, pretty much immediately after this movie, he started starring in Supernatural, which ran till 2020 or 2021, I believe. So almost 15 years of that show, which is wild. That episode actually has Paris Hilton as a guest star, and it takes place in a wax museum, but it starts out they get a call from a girl, and Paris Hilton kidnapped my best friend. And they have to, because the premise of the show is every episode they travel around the country hunting demons and ghosts and righting the wrongs of the paranormal world, basically. So they're guess we have to investigate this. And it turns out Paris Hilton's character appears as Paris Hilton, is Paris Hilton in the story, but she's actually inhabited by an old god that is murderous and bloodthirsty.
That's kind of incredible.
And then they do a direct nod to House of Wax, where Dean, who's played by Jensen Ackles, he just says something I've never even seen a House of Wax. But that's the fun thing about Supernatural. Supernatural has all these episodes where it's kind of just break the walls down. Lots of real life commentary, lots of one-off strange episodes. But yeah, I recommend watching that if anybody's halfway interested. You don't have to know anything about Supernatural. It's pretty much like watching the X-Files, where you can mostly just tune into a random episode. But yeah, that's my other watch list recommendation. Did you have any other ones? I don't know if...
Yeah. Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Yes, because that's looped in the theater in this town in the movie.
And it's an over 2 hour long runtime for that movie, so I just didn't have time to get to it. It looks fantastic. Betty Davis, I think.
Mm-hmm. And Joan Crawford.
I see clips of her performance and it just looks incredible. Maybe we could do a future episode on that. I don't know. I have a feeling I'm really going to like that one.
I never got around to watching that either, but out of the vague stuff I know about it, like it does deal with battling sisters, so it kind of fits into House of Wax because of that.
Yeah.
There's like a doll in that movie, I think, or multiple dolls. Sorry, guys, I just have never seen it. So.
It's about like a toxic sibling relationship.
Yeah.
Where they're like very much relying on each other at the same time, like hate each other. Definitely a theme.
Yes, we see that from the very beginning. I'll start with the summary now. So when the movie starts, there's this like whimsical music and it's like overlaid on this montage of melting wax, and it kind of has that weird feeling of like a 90s Tim Burton movie.
Oh, yeah.
If anybody's seen Mouse Hunt, which is directed by the same director of The American Ring, the Ring movie, kind of opens the same way, where it's just like this weird montage and twinkly music. I thought that was cool because it kind of doesn't even fit with the rest of the movie, but it gives it that weird, strong opening that works with that scene specifically.
It's really funny you mentioned Tim Burton because we didn't even talk about this. I made a note here. Reminds me of the beginning of Edward Scissorhands.
Yes. No, that I think I had that same thought.
Like the toy maker things in a workshop.
And it's so funny because like the rest of the movie doesn't retain that tone.
No.
It's out of place, but I don't know, I love it. That opening scene, we kind of see a family who is maybe eating breakfast. You can't see their faces. It's kind of shot from above or shot from 3/4 of the way up. You can't see their faces. The mother's preparing a wax face mold. Then like dad brings in a child who's tantruming. They strap him down and duct tape him into a chair while that music is still playing, that twinkly music. The boy scratches his mother and she hits him. So they're just laying that scene of there's some kind of messed up child abuse happening somewhere involved in the wax museum, because clearly she's making a wax mask. We meet our group of friends that the movie's about. It opens with a Deftones song.
I have that underlined. Opens with Deftones. Like, how did people not love this movie?
I know. I love that you had it over. You were like, yes, we're talking about this.
I'm so happy you're hitting like all the notes that I wrote.
Yeah, because we don't compare notes before the first, like all fresh to the other one. Like,
no. Oh my god, the soundtrack in this movie is chef's kiss. Immaculate.
They throw in like Disturbed, I think. They throw in Marilyn Manson.
Yeah, Stooges.
I did realize that. Yeah, so great soundtrack for sure. Who's the soundtrack for besides people like us? Like,
I know.
So we meet our people. We meet Carly, who's played by Alicia Cuthbert, Paige, who's played by Paris Hilton. They're kind of just sitting together in a diner. They're looking at classified ads for a college apartment, and that kind of just establishes that they've got a close friendship and they're either going to college or going back to college. Paige is really sweet to Carly. You can tell they're really good friends. Then we see another character named Wade, that's played by Jared Padalecki, and then Blake, who's played by Robert Richard. He plays Paris's boyfriend, and Wade plays the boyfriend of Alicia Cuthbert's character, Carly. Then we also meet the guy that kind of sticks out a little. His character's name is Nick, and he's played by Chad Michael Murray.
Ooh.
And he's a huge dick. He like walks out of the store and like kicks a drink out of some guy's hand and tells him to get a job. And then it's also kind of established that, like, you know, Nick is kind of a criminal. He like stole a car and Blake had to post his bail. After we meet him, we meet Dalton, who's like kind of just the fun friend with them who has a video camera in his hand at all times. And we do also learn that Carly and Nick are brother and sister. They're twins. The setting and the established setting of this is they're on a road trip to go to a football game. I think they're going from Florida to Alabama. They're driving at night. And the thing about this movie is I think you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit because some things happen that are kind of silly, such as they're driving at night and then they just decide they're like getting on each other's nerves. They're tired. Somebody's just like, let's just pull over and camp.
Yeah, what the hell?
Let's just camp in this patch of woods on the side of the road.
In this ditch off the highway.
Right,
clearing.
I don't think most people do that. I think there are plenty of people who do that. I mean, maybe I'd do it. I have friends who would certainly do it, but this group just doesn't seem like the kind of group that would be like okay with that.
No.
And then just a quick note also, they drive past a sign for a place called Trudy's Wax Museum, and I think Wade is the one that points it out. That scene kind of parallels something that happens in Tourist Trap, because when we see those kids driving in the car, one of them actually points out a wax museum sign on the side of the road. So when they're like getting ready for camp, Carly and Paige are talking. Paige might be pregnant. Carly wants her to tell Blake, but Paige doesn't want to panic him. We kind of also learn that Carly's boyfriend and her brother, they don't get along at all. Nick is also mad that like his sister didn't cover for him when he stole a car. Nick's pretty aggressive. Then they kind of just have fun around the campfire. At one point, they just smell like a bad smell and remark about it, but don't come back to it. We do find out later what the bad smell is. Dalton's filming them with the camera. They're talking about everything, all their drama. Then a truck rolls up with its headlights on, and it kind of just harasses them, but parking there, which I kind of love that as a mechanism in these kind of like backwoods horror movies. You know, if it's nighttime, a guy's gonna show up in a truck and shine his headlights on you and then drive away. Like, it's just gotta happen.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And sometimes he even chases you. We kind of get this weird aside between like that and the next morning where camera footage of an unknown person walking around and filming them all while they're sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this funny line where Carly says she hears something and Wade's just like, it's probably a serial killer or something. Which I love. Then they go back to bed, wake up really late in the afternoon at 2:30. Dalton's camera's gone, and Wade finds out that the fan belt in his car is messed up. They are driving in two cars. I don't know if I established that. They're driving in two cars. They have two cars parked there, but Wade's fan belt is all messed up. Carly's like peeing in the woods with Paige, and they smell that weird smell, so they go to see what it is. Carly falls down a hill, like really dramatically, definitely lands hands first, almost head first into a pit of rotting roadkill. Which I cannot imagine falling into that. That is, one piece of roadkill is bad, let alone a pit of roadkill. She is kind of stuck. She can't get out. She sees a hand sticking out of the pile. Wade does help her get up, and then another truck rolls up, but it's different than the one they saw last night. Wade points out it has two working headlights. The one last night did not. The guy's emptying his roadkill into the pit, and they point out the hand, and then the guy pulls it out, and it turns out it's just a mannequin hand. So
got him.
Yep.
You know, that part when she falls into the pit, like, kind of remind me of that movie Cabin Fever.
Oh, it's been a while since I've seen that. But this does give me the vibes of all those movies, like Cabin Fever, all of those.
Mm-hmm.
Wrong Turn. This is like the first guy they see, so Wade asks him where he can get a fan belt. The guy says that he can go buy one from Bo up the road 15 miles, and he volunteers to give Wade a ride. They get in the car with him. The other ones plan to stay at camp for him to get the fan belt and come back. Have you ever gotten a ride from a weird tow truck driver? Because I have.
No, I've never done that. I'd be very scared. I get stranger danger really bad.
I do too. I don't know if I said what kind of truck this guy has. I can't remember. I don't think he has a tow truck, does he? Or does he just have a pickup truck? Anyway, it has room for roadkill. But
ew, I love this guy's character too. Like, he's just so weird.
He's so weird and shady. Yeah. And we don't even see that much of him. Well, I'll tell you my tow truck.
Yeah, you gotta tell me.
Story real quick.
Please.
My boyfriend and I were trying to go see a movie, and once we got like 3/4 of the way there, my car started overheating, so I had to turn around and go back home. But I was being really stubborn about it. Like, I didn't want to call a tow truck. I'm like, well, we'll just pull over. It'll overheat. We'll drive. We'll pull over. So we did that, and it took a long ass time to get home, and we ended up 3 miles from home, and that was when I gave up. I'm like, okay, I can't get this car home because there's not a shoulder to pull off to after this. It's just going to be bad if the car shuts off. So called the tow truck driver. He didn't take too long to get there, and he only lived like a couple miles up the road from us. But we were like, hey, like, would you be able to give us a ride? And I was really against this, but I was like, there's no other choice at this point. Like, we just have to go with him. And we're 3 miles from home, but you can't really walk. So we went with him. And like, as soon as we got out, we were parked in a closed gas station parking lot. As soon as we got on the main road, his truck just shut off.
Oh my god.
But then he got it running, and we kept going, and he kept like fucking with his phone GPS because it was a AAA tow truck driver, so like they track him on the GPS on his phone. So he was like fucking with that the whole time. He took a really weird way to get home. If he was familiar, he would have taken a different road.
God.
But he took this narrow road over like this narrow bridge, and then just decided to stop in the middle of the road and start fucking with the GPS.
Oh no.
After that, I feel like there were weird other weird things he did. We were talking to him. But then at one point, we went around a sharp turn and the driver's door just flew open.
What the fuck? That is so scary. What the hell? How did that happen?
I think it just wasn't closed. It was loose, and it
What's wrong with this guy?
It flew open when he went around a turn, like a left-hand turn.
What did he do when it flew open?
Just stopped in the middle of the fucking road again, and then pulled it shut.
Did he look scared or anything? Was he like, "Oops"?
This was a very minor event for him that his door flew open while we were driving.
I bet that happens to him all the time. Like, is that the vibe you got? Like, this happens.
Yeah, he wasn't bothered, but I mean, this isn't the wildest tow truck driver story out there, but like, I was tired. I wanted to get home. No. I'm like, oh, what is this guy doing? We did get home safe. Guy was really nice. All is well. But yeah, that was a very strange tow truck ride.
Like, imagine if the car, like his truck turned off. Like, who tows the tow truck? Like, how many tow trucks?
Who tows the tow truck? Who tows the tow truck?
This sounds like the beginning of a nightmare where it's like that tow truck breaks down and then we gotta wait for another tow truck and then that one breaks down. And it's just like never ending. It sounds like hell.
Groundhog Day of tow trucks.
Yeah.
So Carly and Wade are taking the ride from the truck driver. No doors fly open or anything like that, but there are bones hanging from the ceiling. I'm surprised the guy that picked us up didn't have bones hanging from the ceiling, honestly. Like, the doors were broken, like everything was fucked up. So there's like bones hanging from the ceiling. Carly kind of tries to like roll the window down and she can't get it down, so she's kind of suspicious of the truck driver. And then suddenly they can't get into town because there's a flooded stream area. So they ask to be let out and he lets them. Wade and Carly enter town and it's kind of just this like main street. There's a nice mountain behind it. It's pretty rural and there's nobody around. And then the crew that they left behind, they tried to go to the football game and they got stuck in traffic. That's another thing you have to suspend your disbelief about because it's so pointless in the story for them to like decide they're going to the football game and then just come back. But anyway, like Paige calls and says they're heading back. As they're walking around, like Carly sees some like little puppies sleeping in the pet shop window. But other than that, there's not really any movement, not really any people around. Like she sees somebody like peek out their curtains at her, but it looks pretty dead. They see that, on the marquee at the theater, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is the movie playing. And the town is kind of in an Art Deco style, which I thought was cool because I feel like that's definitely like a direct nod to the wax movies of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So I thought that was really neat. Their main objective here is to try and find the right size belt so they can fix his car and get moving. So Carly's like, hey, why don't we ask somebody at the church? Which...
What a great idea.
Which I don't understand because like the chance of somebody being in a church when it's not a Sunday morning or like a Saturday night is very low, I feel. So I can't remember. Maybe she hears something or like sees something that makes her say that.
It does seem out of nowhere. That kind of struck me as odd too. At this point, I'm just kind of like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's very strange that she suggests that they go talk to somebody at the church. Luckily for them, when they open the door, there's a funeral going on. No. There's like a priest at the front. There's a guy kneeling down by a coffin. He like sees them and they shut the door kind of embarrassed. He does come out and they ask him about the fan belt, kind of realize that he is Beau. And then he says the line, you walked in on a funeral for a fucking fan belt? So Beau says he'll meet them at the garage in a half an hour. Wade is still acting weird. He's kind of like standoffish. Carly's kind of embarrassed that like he's acting weird and they like walked in on the funeral and whatnot. Then we kind of get this random cut scene of a guy with long hair. You can't see his face. He's creating a wax figure. You see like the wax dripping and stuff like that. And then that's kind of shown as Carly and Wade are approaching what building with a sign on it that says Wax Museum. Wade starts scratching at the door with his key and realizes that the whole door is made of wax. They just wander in and walk around. Wade keeps like touching things. Like all Wade does is like be nosy and touch things, and it stresses me out so much. He's just like wandering around looking at everything. This part of the Wax Museum is almost like you like walked in on a mansion at a party. Like there's kind of like ladies drink smoking and stuff like that. It's like a piano and like a set dinner table. And then Wade starts walking towards a wax dog, but turns out it's a real dog. which runs away from him. Carly starts like inspecting these little figurines she found. There's like little things with tentacles and things that look like mermaids, and they're all signed on the bottom by an artist named Vincent. We do see those shitty baby chairs, like the high chairs from the beginning that those kids were like taped into. A shadow outside catches her eye. Wade goes to check it out, but there's nothing there. She was too afraid to go outside, so she keeps going through the museum, which I don't I think I would probably go outside. I don't think I'd keep looking in the wax museum if something scared me, like even if it was outside. And Wade like tries to get in a basement door, and then he like taps on the window and scares her, and she gets so scared that she knocks a wax figure on the floor and it breaks. Then we get a cutscene back to the crew, and this is such a weird scene. Nick and Dalton, so Nick, her boyfriend, and Dalton, the camera guy, are like both peeing at the same tree. And then Blake comes running over and like he's trying to push them along. He's like, "Are you going to have sex? Because Paige and I are."
Just goofing around.
There's so many random just like weird one-liners in this. Blake is real serious about banging his girlfriend.
He's super serious. Like that's his main objective besides
exactly
football.
That's his character motivation. That's it. They get to the auto garage and like Wade's walking around. Wade kind of brings up that he's annoyed that her brother had to come on the trip because if he hadn't, they wouldn't have had to split cars and this wouldn't have happened. Wade kind of just seems like he doesn't get along with him at all. He does find the wrong size belt, which is a 16-inch, but it's all they had. And then Bo magically appears and he starts accusing them of trying to steal stuff. But then he says he has 15-inch belts at home. He gets stuff delivered there when he's not at the shop, which also doesn't make any sense. You'd think it would be easier to deliver it just to the shop. But anyway.
Red flags should be going off at this point.
Right. So he invites them to the house, and like Wade asks to use the bathroom, but Bo's like, "No, you can just use the one at my house."
No. Like, you're a man. Just piss outside, dude.
Right. There's nobody looking. There's nobody in town.
Yeah.
So as they walk, there's kind of some background information where Bo explains that Vincent, who is the guy we haven't really met, who signed the underside of the sculptures, he's one of Trudy's sons. And then the background story to that is that she had something that ruptured in her brain and she kind of lost her mind about it. The doctor, who was her husband, couldn't save her, so he took his own life. And then the boys ended up in foster homes. So that's our background about Trudy's Wax Museum. Bo said they should get in the car. He'll give them a ride. He takes Wade in to use the bathroom. Carly waits. Bo changes his clothes. The house I thought was a really cool set. Like, what did you think of the house set? It's kind of like a hoarder house full of like books and like wax faces.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, like, or even the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like just a very shady looking house. And just really creepy.
There's also like wet specimens. Like Wade walks in.
Yeah.
So Wade like uses the bathroom and then just starts wandering around the whole house. And he finds like a fetal pig in a jar and just starts shaking it around like it's a snow globe. And I'm like sweating this whole time. And it kind of starts getting dark outside while Carly waits for him to come out. When they woke up at the camp, it was 2:30. But the early darkness is kind of explained away because when they're in town, Carly's like, "Oh, I hate winter. It gets so dark." So we could probably assume it's still only like 5:30 or something, that it's dark. Wade also sees in the house, he sees a diploma for somebody named Vincent St. Clair for dental surgery. And then he sees a room filled with leather restraints and surgery tools. And at this point, we're about a third of the way through the movie or so. The red flags finally start going off for Carly. She gets out of the car. She starts honking the horn to get him to come back out. The power goes off in the house on Wade, and then somebody comes out of a trap door and cuts his Achilles tendon and stabs him.
The Achilles tendon thing always gets me.
When you think of this movie, you think of how known that that move was. Like that was in the trailers. That was what people were talking about relating to this movie. And then also, like, I don't know what the plan exactly was supposed to be here. I think Wade made this really easy because he was just wandering around the house for no reason except his own curiosity and made it easy for this guy to get him. Like there was no chase. Like he just came out of the door. Like Carly tries to call for help. She still doesn't know what happened to Wade and nobody answers. When Bo comes out, Carly hides the phone because she knows there's something up with him. He does have the fan belt. She locks herself in his truck He gets mad. He starts breaking the window. He tries to drag her out. She realizes that he was the one that showed up to the campsite the night before. She kind of gets pushed into this strange position, so she's able to push the gas pedals with her hands, trying to get him to fly off the truck. The part that's interesting about this is she seems like she's fully ready to make the escape with or without Wade. Like, fuck Wade. If he's not out on the porch, she's leaving without him. Like,
Absolutely.
she needs to get out of there. She loses the phone. He reappears, and she climbs out the back of the truck, which is that part that I said felt like Texas Chainsaw Massacre when Sally's in the truck bed at the highway right before the credits roll. Carly runs into town, and then we kind of get some back and forth scenes here of things happening simultaneously. So while Carly's on the run and going through the town, we see this scene of Wade getting his clothes cut off. He's like drugged. The guy starts slathering him in wax. And at this point, you assume that he's slathering him in wax to make a wax figure, which he does eventually. But this part is just so he could wax his hair off his face. Like, which kind of comes out of left field unless you know what's happening, because he puts the wax on, puts a piece of cloth down, and just rips off his eyebrows.
Yeah. Is he in the like that chair that
he gets put into the contraption right after that? And when I was watching the behind the scenes stuff, like that helmet of like pins, like that was a fully real thing that they put on his head, and like had to screw the pins to like hold against his head. So he was like, yeah, I had like metal pins in my cheeks. Like, Jesus. It seemed like it was heavy. Like, yeah. There's also a part in that making of documentary where, so in this scene, when he sits in the contraption, that's when his body's sprayed with wax. And it's not him the whole time. Sometimes it's a body double. Sometimes it's a dummy. It just depends on what angle it is. But anyway, his character gets sprayed with wax, and then Jared, the actor, did not want to get sprayed with this wax. He was very afraid of getting sprayed with this wax. And I kind of felt bad for him, because it seemed like he was trying to refuse to do it and just ask for a whole body double, but they didn't seem to want to do it for him, which I feel like that wouldn't fly now, but this was...
It sounds traumatizing
almost 20 years ago.
To film, like just knowing that contraption was a real thing he was like hooked up to, like that must be traumatizing.
If he needed to get out of that quickly, like they would still need like a couple minutes to get him out of it. So
is this before or after the set burned down?
This was before, which
oh
is,
my God.
They're lucky it didn't happen then.
Yeah.
Really, like I don't know. It's just wild to think about how much stuff used to fly in movies and on movie sets, and now finally, for everyone's well-being, there's a lot stricter rules for movie sets. We do see like Wade is drugged, but he can still make noise. So he's like paralyzed but can make noise. And he's being sprayed with that wax. Eventually, like Jared kind of agreed to do the wax thing, but like for the longest time they were like, just put your, we'll take your arm, we'll spray it. And there's this funny scene where he was telling Chad about it, and Chad's like, oh, that's not gonna hurt, it feels good. He's like, I used to pour candle wax on myself all the time and make molds in my hands.
Yeah, okay, that's what you were doing with the candle wax.
But I just thought that was so funny. He's like, what are you worried about? It's not a big deal.
Oh my God.
And realistically, you can get like wax that melts at a low temperature. So you can get wax that is close to body temperature, that really has a low chance of burning you. But who knows what they were using in this movie? Who knows if that was wax that was like 160 degrees?
I mean, people still get shot with prop guns.
They do, yeah.
So
sometimes things just go wrong.
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience making candles, so it has a lot to do with the temperature. So I use soy wax. I heat it to 180 degrees and then wait for it to cool 20 degrees to 160. That's when I mix my scent in so it doesn't burn off. And I've touched that wax at that point and I haven't been burned. I'm well aware of the fact that it can burn me, like if it falls on like an area of sensitive skin. I don't know what they were using, what temperature wax they were using, but he was probably right to try not to do it, and kind of sucks that he was sort of made to do it. Seems like all these people in this movie went through a lot.
Yeah.
They went through a lot of stuff. So Carly like runs to get help in the town, and she runs into the church, and there's kind of some like noise and whispering and music in the church. But then we realize that they're just tape recordings on speakers because everyone there is a wax figure. And what I thought was interesting about the making of this is that I think pretty much everybody in the audience was real, but the reason they look so fake is because they are wearing big rubber masks. So that's such a cool thing, though, because then they just have to hire people. They don't have to make full body models to fit in those pews.
And you know, in the first movie, The Mystery of the Wax Museum from 1933, they also use real people instead of wax.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, in the shots, and they zoom in, and you could tell they just like do something to the face to make it kind of look,
a little pasty or something.
Yeah, a little pastier, a little more faker, but it's a real person that they use. I really like that. I think that translates really well with these wax movies.
It's very cool in this movie. I like that they were wearing rubber masks because it gives it that just little touch of like something's not right. It's perfect.
And they're supposed to be real dead bodies with wax over it, so it works.
It does. At some point in the church, she knocks an arm off the wax figure and discovers that there's a real human arm like inside. Like she sees, I don't know, she sees like flesh and muscle and stuff. So then she knows something's really wrong. We also notice a little touch there that permanent funeral is for Trudy. So that's Trudy's funeral in that church at all times in this wax museum.
Always with the mommy issues.
Yeah, the mommy issues. When Beau comes in, he knows she's in there because he saw that arm on the floor, and then eventually he finds her hiding under the priest's robes. He chases her outside, tackles her down, and then that woman from earlier peeks out of her curtain again. Nick and Dalton enter the town. They take the creek on foot again. Beau takes Carly to the basement of the garage shop where he tapes her to the chair while Marilyn Manson's song plays. Then she kind of hears like Dalton and Nick walking around because she's under a sewer grate. Beau threatens her with a knife, tells her not to say anything. And at this point, if you're looking closely, you can also notice that he has burns all up and down his forearms under his sleeves. Back to the top, Nick is pretty sure nobody's there. And there's kind of another back and forth where we see like Nick trying to go into a 24-hour pharmacy, but it's got a locked door. There's nobody in there. This is another infamous scene from this that I feel like was in the trailer and something a lot of people talked about, where Beau super glues her lips shut so she can't talk.
At this point in the movie, this movie got my heartbeat racing and disturbed me to my core.
There's just a thing after a thing after a thing.
Yeah.
Like
even the chase scene right before this, the way that they film it.
And then he drags her across the ground. Like,
yeah, it gave me like a heart attack. I felt like I was gonna have an anxiety attack because they do like a top-down shot of him chasing her, so you could see him like speeding up and about to catch her, and you're like, no.
That's such a cool shot, though. I love that.
So good. And as far as like someone getting chased by someone, it's so much more effective at feeling the horror of someone catching up to you because you could see him catching up instead of usually they shoot it from in front of the person getting chased. But yeah, there's just so many different ways that they did all the shots and the injuries that just they really took their time with like how disturbing can we make this?
Exactly. And just amazing how obviously the internet was a thing, but it's not like now where you can see 25 TikToks of a viral scene before you go to see a movie. Yeah. This was either you saw it in the preview or you just heard about it or you read about it in a magazine. And then when you actually go see it, you know, you see it materialize in front of you, basically. I feel like House of Wax, even though I did not appreciate it for what it was at the time, I think I relate to this movie in a way that a lot of people relate to if they had been a teenager in the 80s, growing up with Friday the 13th or, Nightmare on Elm Street as they were coming out. Just hearing the buzz about these kills and how wild they are, and then going to see the movie finally.
So yeah, he super glues her mouth. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, super glues your mouth shut, which super glue on your skin, sometimes it burns, like sometimes it hurts. Super glue or nail glue or whatever, you can stick your fingers together really easily. But to be fair, if you're really in this situation and you're really desperate to survive, I feel like she could have ripped her lips apart a lot earlier than she did, because it's a couple layers of skin. It's gonna hurt, but you'd be pumped up on adrenaline anyway, right?
I don't know. I feel like I would hesitate at ripping my lip skin off. Like your lip is so sensitive, and it is. But would you even think that?
Like, would you even have that thought in your head?
I would. I'd be like, you know what? Just kill me.
Just give it up easy.
just kill me. Just like some things give me the ick where I'm just like, just kill me at that point. Like, I don't care. Like you cut my Achilles heel. It's the worst thing that can happen. Like, just take me out. I'm never recovering from this if I live.
That's true. That's true. You'd have to live with it. And you know what? Worse things happen to Carly after this even. So after he glues her lips shut, he like goes upstairs and Nick approaches him and says he's looking for his sister and his sister's boyfriend. Nick is like kind of like aggressive and standoffish again. Bo denies seeing anybody. And down below, so she's under a sewer grate, sort of, so she can hear him talking and she can see the street light. She tries to scream and make noise, but she can't. But she manages to disconnect the arm of the chair that she's attached to, stand up, and like start putting her fingers through the grate so he can see her. But guess what? Just as soon as you start recovering from seeing her getting her lips glued shut, Bo bends down, pretends to tie a shoe, and cuts her finger off with wire cutters.
Oh, yeah. Ugh.
It's just one thing after another in this movie.
Girl, yeah.
So he cuts her finger off. She does pry her mouth open at that point to scream. Nick hears it, and then he gets in like this knockdown fight with him.
I'm holding my mouth right now thinking about that. I can't. Oh, God.
I don't know. The finger is worse. The finger's worse to me than the super glue. So Nick like gets into the auto garage, he locks the doors, and you kind of see that part of Nick that's, you know, you get that idea up until then that he's kind of rough and tumble, he's kind of in trouble with police a lot, probably gets in a lot of fights. But at this point, you kind of see his like survival mode and his fight mode, and it makes sense. And you're kind of thankful for that in that moment. I mean, I don't give a shit if he steals a car, whatever. But I'm just saying,
he's
like,
definitely
he proves
the person,
himself. Like
he's someone you want on your side when the shit hits the fan, because he's not gonna take any nonsense.
Nick gets to the basement to release her. After he releases her, there's that throwaway line that is just so funny where one of them says, "This place is a freak show," which is like, I just love when people make such an understatement in a horror movie. Yeah. Like, it's just the understatement of the movie. Like, she just got her finger cut off and oh God. Anyway.
Was that like a segue to her explaining the town's fake?
I think at this point they don't realize the town's fake yet.
Oh, right. Okay.
They find out very soon. We get another cutscene to catch up with Dalton, who's in the wax museum. He does find Wade, who's sitting motionless next to a piano. And for some reason, he like pokes at his face, but his fingers sink into his cheek.
Oh, this part gets me too.
Wade's eyes move. And then Dalton's telling him he'll hold tight and will get him out. So he starts trying to peel the wax, peel it off his skin, but it's taking his skin. Then a masked man comes up behind Dalton, takes a swing at him. It misses, and then it slices the face off of Wade's dummy. And you can see his teeth. You can see like all this muscle and blood, which I think looks really cool. It's gross, it's scary, it's weird, but it looks so cool. And that was another image that I remember seeing in the trailer, having people talk about that just goes down in history with this movie.
That is truly horrifying. Like, he's trying to help his friend, and he ends up just pulling part of his face off. And he's like, and you get that reaction from him. He's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And he's like, maybe trying to put it back. And you're like, "Oh, I know.
Oh, the damage has been done, dude." Like,
it is such a horrifying scene. I think this scene might be the one that got to me the most.
Also, to note, in case anybody hasn't actually seen it and is just listening to us talk about it, when his face gets sliced off, I think his eyes are still darting around. So to note, he's definitely still alive when his face gets partially sliced off.
The eyes frantically darting around. Mm-hmm. You're like, how much of this is he feeling too?
Everything.
Yeah.
He's just drugged into like not moving. He can still feel everything.
Oh yeah. It's like that sinking feeling you get like in Hereditary, you know, the scene.
Mm-hmm. Like it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. Yeah, just the idea of like accidentally like killing or hurting one of your friends is just, that gets me.
I do like that trope in a movie though. I like when I watch something and it just fills me with the dread because it's like, oh my God, one easy decision and you wouldn't have been in this situation, but you are, and it keeps getting worse and worse. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's called a horror movie by those standards. This one is very good at this point.
And I will say, like, I know I'm a broken record about how much I really like this movie, but I do think this movie has a feel very close to late 70s, early 80s slashers, where it's like just gnarly kills.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, what do you think of when you think of Friday the 13th? Probably like those kids getting skewered together, or like, you know, you think of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequel. I always think of Freddy with the syringe fingers. Like, there's just certain things that like stay in your head, and these kills just kind of have that constant barrage of happening this way, and it really sweeps you away with it. Then the way Dalton dies right after this scene, he like gets chased around by that masked guy. He like tries to throw plates at him to stop him. He can't stop him. And when he kills him by like crossing two knives and an X over his throat. And I forgot about that kill, but when I had seen that a couple years ago and then seen it upon my other rewatch, it's a pretty cool kill. Like,
yes,
just like he just cuts his head off, and then by the way, when his head rolls away, his eyes are still moving around. So they give you another gnarly, gross out scene like that.
The details, people. That's what really makes it horrifying.
And I will say, like, in this movie, I think they used a wild amount of practical effects. You could tell they used a lot of green screen in the closing scenes. Like, a lot of the stuff was practical, and it just looks so good. And I feel like this movie was on one of the last waves of heavy practical before everything could be a green screen.
Absolutely. And I think they probably had to fight for that too at this point. No,
yeah, you have to really work at it. It's like a lot. It gets to be a lost art.
But it always looks better.
It does. And we'll talk more about the other practical effects. There's also a reason you shouldn't use practical effects, as we'll learn later.
Double-edged sword.
Speaking of swords, that guy just had his head cut off with two knives. Then we get another jump to Bo jumping out of like a yellow tow truck. Nick is still inside the auto garage looking for a weapon. And he kind of settles on like a heavy wrench or like a tire iron, or I don't know what he grabs. I remember thinking, like, he's in a garage. He has everything he could possibly imagine to use as like a bludgeoning weapon, and that's what he goes with. Like, that's all he goes with. He's just like, this is good enough. They realize the landlines are dead. They can't call anybody. Her phone is in the truck that's back up at the house. Carly starts wondering about the worst, and, you know, asks Nick, what if they turned Wade to wax? And he asks what she means, and she said, everyone's wax in the town except one person. She's like, I remember this woman peeking out of the curtains. So they go to investigate to maybe try and get help from her, but I don't know if I would necessarily want help from her if I was them, because she's seen all these things happen, and she just looks out of her curtains.
Yeah, at this point, I think that she's a real person, but she's in on it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be going to her for help.
No.
But either way, turns out they go to see her, and she's just a rigged wax figure animated to open these curtains every so often.
So good. Like,
she's like a little old lady with curlers.
These twists genuinely get me. I'm not expecting these to be all wax. Like, I feel like I'm surprised to learn this with them.
You kind of realize at this point, they might cut back to it, I don't remember, but then you realize, oh, those puppies in the pet store window with the wagging tails, those were just animated. Like, those were machine animated. They weren't real puppies. But yeah, I remember watching this for the first time, and I was surprised when they tried to get help from this woman and she wasn't real. Then we get another iconic scene for a lot of people from this movie, which I feel like was another one promised in the trailer. But Paige is doing this like long, slow striptease for Blake. I just feel like people loved that. She decides like maybe it's time to tell him that she might be pregnant, but she doesn't get that out before he leaves the tent because the music had stopped. He went to go put it on. Meantime, he listens to Carly's voicemail, so he hears her kind of asking for help, saying she can't find Wade, and then he hears her screaming because Bo comes out of the house and chases her when Wade was in the house. Then he knows there's something wrong. Then we cut to Paris going out to see where Blake is, and then we see that Blake was killed. He's stabbed in the neck on the ground, and the phone is next to him. So she tries to run away. She runs into this warehouse, which is an old sugar mill, which apparently was a real like sugar mill warehouse. So it's just this like gnarly old abandoned building that they filmed in.
Oh wow.
She's just running around in her like underwear and robe. She tries to hide. We do see that there's milk crates full of cell phones from presumably all the dead people, cars, personal belongings, everything, which is another thing you have to suspend your mind about, because how did no one ever notice this many people going missing? That's a lot of people that went missing.
At this point, the FBI's got to be involved.
I know, and they're not, and nobody knows. Come on, there's nothing really around this area. Plenty of people pass through. I don't know. But she grabs like a steak, She's stabbed in the foot, and it kind of goes across the back vertically, like on the tendon. So it's like another like Achilles cut almost, which is really gross. He starts stabbing the knife through the grate over and over, which I feel like this happens in quite a few movies. It happens in Thanksgiving through the trampoline, which I think happens in the Thanksgiving preview. I think it might happen in The Burning. Like, doesn't it happen in a raft in one of the movies?
I don't know. Like, I'm definitely familiar with this kind of suspense thing.
And
like,
it's such a scary thing, too, because you don't know where that knife's coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, where they're like stabbing something through something that someone's hiding behind, and you're like, you don't know if they're gonna get stabbed or not.
So she does get away. She tries to hide in the car. He opens the door. She tries to stab him. Then he takes the stake, and while she's hidden, he launches it like a spear directly through her head, and she dies.
It like impales her, and then her head like slides down on further down into the spear. Oof.
I don't know for sure. I don't know if this was a conscious decision. She dies on her knees, which is a demeaning position to die in, obviously. Yeah. And then the masked guy that killed her, he kind of films it for posterity to keep it on the camera. Back to the beginning, Dalton's always running around the camera. Dalton says that's hot at some point. Are they just being mean to Paris Hilton at this point?
It's like Paris Hilton sex tape. Let's do that.
I know.
Since she's in the movie.
Let's remind everybody every 10 minutes.
Yeah. Like, hey, she did a sex tape, guys.
God, man, so glad that the early 2000s are done and over with.
Yeah, terrible.
We had seen so much and put up with so much and heard so much that people growing up now they were not witness to those things.
I think they're like, oh, like Paris Hilton is like a gimmick for this movie. People are going to expect this, so let's give them that. But it's still shitty.
Definitely. The whole media tour was like, see Paris die. Come see House of Wax. See Paris die.
Yeah. It's like you punish you for being a whore kind of thing.
I mean, don't all horror movies in a way?
Yeah.
So I guess they're just in line with every other horror movie.
I guess that's kind of how it gets started, right? It's like, hey guys, don't act like this or do this or you'll get murdered.
Yep. Then we kind of cut back. Carly and Nick are sneaking through the town. Nick kicks a window and grabs a crossbow from a mannequin in the store. Bo shows up. They start shooting at each other. Nick and Carly run to the theater. When they're in the theater auditorium, we do see like a clip from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane on the screen, and we see that the seats are occupied by wax figures. We also notice that Carly is sitting in the audience pretending to be a wax figure. So she's sitting there motionless. Bo sneaks around. He's trying to figure out where she is. And we kind of get this cool fake out death where Bo does shoot at one of them and it's framed to look like the back of Carly's head. But then we see when it's shot, it was just a wax figure and she doesn't get shot. When Bo does notice her, I think that's when Nick shoots him. So he shoots him with an arrow from the crossbow, shoots him a couple times. So he gets like 2 arrows, like one in his arm, one in his shoulder. He falls to the ground. Nick tells Carly to check his pockets for ammo. He's like passed out or dead. We don't know at this point. I think there's no ammo, so his shotgun is useless, so they don't take it. At this point, there's some inconsistency, I feel, where Carly is kind of worried about Wade, but who's worried about Dalton? Nobody's talking about Dalton. Nobody's like, where did Dalton go?
Yeah, no one gives a shit about Dalton.
Poor Dalton.
Aww.
They run back to the house, try to get her phone from under the truck seat, but it's gone. Nick says they'll go in the house. They'll try and find maybe Wade, I guess. They try and get into the gun cabinet, but they need a key. Carly, in her searching, finds a newspaper articles about conjoined twins being abandoned by a doctor. We see some photos. There's like a child with an empty eye socket. And suddenly, Bo enters the house, but they hide. He doesn't know they're in there. And Bo takes himself to the kitchen and starts trying to get the arrows out of himself. There's that other gross out scene where he pulls a whole arrow out of his arm.
Oh.
And then the other arrow, which makes more sense. I don't know why. If you're in a survival situation, I feel this is the better move, but he just clips the arrow because he can't pull it out. So he clips it so it's shorter so it won't get caught on anything, even though it's still like skewering his body. I think while Nick is in the background, he finds that trap door in the back room. Vincent, who is that guy with the mask and long hair, shows up. Paige's and Blake's bodies are in the back of his truck. Bo kind of scolds him for leaving the house or the town without him. I'm not sure which. Vincent tries to help him get the arrow out. He kind of insults him. And then Vincent lights a candle and a spoon and tries to fix like a hole in his wax mask. He's using the toaster oven or toaster as a mirror. Bo warms back up and he's just trying to say like, Mom would be proud proud. She always said your talent would make up for what got took away from you. And at this point we realize like they are brothers. They seem to be brothers. When Bo sees that there's photos on the floor, he realizes that those people, you know, Nick and Carly made it in the house. She does make it down the trapdoor. And then Nick ridiculously starts flipping the switches on the breaker. Bo sees the lights from upstairs, like all the lights in town going on and off. So he knows that under the house is the only way to control those lights. Therefore, he knows that they made it down under the house. And then at this point, we do see Nick finds Dalton's hat, and then he sees Dalton's body in that wax contraption. Oof. And then there's just this like sad, touching scene where he's like, "I'll get you out of here," and he touches it, and his head falls off.
Right off. Talk about Hereditary, dude.
Oh, terrifying. Like his head just falls off. And then some people seem to read like a subtext between Dalton and Nick, but other people read a subtext between Carly and Nick, and I don't know if I necessarily believe each one, but I think it was just showing that, like, the scene was just showing that Nick does have feelings and did deeply, deeply care about his friend who is clearly dead. We did learn earlier that I think Dalton stole the car and then Nick took the fall.
Yeah.
Because Nick has, like, a worse record than him. He didn't want Dalton to ruin his life. Nice on Nick to do that, for sure. Then Vincent appears with his 2 knives. Nick walks and starts trying to throw things at him. The wax pot, like the boiling cauldron of wax, is on fire. He pours it, and that creates a barrier between them. There's human face catacombs, which are pretty cool looking in the wax, and that allows them enough time to separate. They take the tunnel to the wax museum. They see Wade's dead body with the skin ripped off, and then Bo appears, and him and Nick get in a fight. And before we go over this next part, which is pretty wild, do you have any other comments up until this point?
I think I'm just kind of realizing a parallel between the Whatever Happened to Baby Jane movie in this movie. I did read the plot synopsis of the Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and I guess in the movie one of the sisters gets in a car accident and is like paralyzed from the waist down. It's assumed that the other sister got drunk and ran her over.
Oh, wow.
Out of jealousy or something like that. What gets revealed towards the end, which is like a twist, is that the one who was paralyzed, she was driving and she was actually trying to run over the sister that was assumed hit her, the alcoholic jealous one. She was trying to kill that sister. And then her car spun out of control, and then she got paralyzed herself. Oh, she was trying to... So there's like some
That's
weird...
a good twist.
There's like some weird car switcheroo business thing in that movie. Along with the whole toxic sibling thing. So this movie's already crazy, and it just keeps ramping up, and you're like, what the hell's gonna happen now? Like, it can't get more ridiculous, and it just does.
I know there's people out there that are like, oh, House of Wax is so boring, it's so silly. But I think what you have to do when you're watching a movie is you have to realize that some movies are just not other movies. You can categorize them into what movies are similar to other movies. You don't have to say, well, I really like The Godfather, therefore House of Wax sucks.
Yeah.
There's no you're not making any kind of comparison. It's okay to like a throwaway slasher. It's okay to like whatever. Absolutely. But I do know there's people out there that don't love this movie, and that's fine. They can have their own opinion. But I personally love this movie. I think it's fantastic. I think I like this movie because it's very formulaic and simple. All the characters are very clear. It's very clear what their motivations are. It's very clear what their relationships are. Yeah. It's pretty clear what the structure is. It's clear it's relatively clear what the character motivations are for that guy killing people. He's just maladjusted and has mommy issues and wants to collect these people for the museum or whatever. But I just do think it's so simple, and I think that really is why I like it, because it's nothing more than what it says it is. It's just House of Wax 2005. Riding off the coattails of the 90s slashers right before the horror movies kind of changed, because I feel like a short 5 or so years later is when we started getting things like The Conjuring, Insidious, and I know The Conjuring was written by the same writers, but like The Conjuring, Insidious, kind of those different mainstream horror movies. And then after that, of course, it was stuff more like Hereditary and all the movies similar to that. But it's interesting how horror like shifts and changes, and this was definitely like this to me is a standout in the specific genre that it is.
Absolutely. And even though it's formulaic. It's still unique in a lot of ways.
I just find this movie very satisfying.
It is. It's so satisfying. And I love this whole, like, weird twin thing. Like, that's just such... I mean, like, both the protagonist and the antagonist are twins. And you're exploring a lot of different types of toxic sibling and toxic twin relationships. Yeah, God, it's so good. It's just different, but also feels familiar.
This is a comfort movie for me. This is officially a comfort movie for me. Like, it is...
I can see
love
why. Yeah.
It is because it feels familiar. That's what makes a good comfort movie. Obviously, another comfort movie for me is Scream, so I hope that, sheds some light on my psyche here. And Donnie Darko.
Ooh.
Because I am a tortured soul, I guess. I don't know. But that was my first comfort movie, was Donnie Darko. But
That's
anyway.
Good stuff.
Just love misery here.
Hey.
So then I think one of the wildest things about the filming of this we're going to talk about. In this fight scene where Bo and Nick are having it out, they're in like that entrance of the wax museum. You can see the spiral staircase and you can see some wax figures and some stuff on there. Up there is on fire because there was the fire from the basement. While I was watching the making of, I was really impressed because you can see that the fire is practical. It's not added in later. It's not like a super big optical illusion. The way it is that the gas is like piped in under the floor. There's a big hole through the floor. It's a elevated set. So there's literally fire piping through the bottom through holes in the floor, which is happening while they're fighting. When I was watching that MTV documentary, it seemed like Chad Michael Murray was kind of the most affected by this because he was the person closest to it when this happened. But what had happened was he said when he got like knocked down, he suddenly felt like the room was really hot and his skin started bubbling.
Oh.
And then everybody realized that the set had caught fire. So this whole set, which is props covered in wax, real wax, flammable wax, not just like something that doesn't cause a fire that's like looks like wax. It is real wax. There's a reason you don't leave a candle alone. There's a reason that like if you're starting a fire, you use something like wax to help it build. But yeah, anyway, so the set just caught on fire. The flames were going up to the ceiling. Even though they had fire extinguishers, that was no match for it. They could not get the fire out, so everybody had to rush out. This was being filmed inside of one of the Gold Coast Warner Brothers studios. There were 3 sets in a soundstage building. This was one of them, this like mansion entrance. The entire building caught on fire. So the flames went up through that set, through the building. Nobody died or anything, which is incredible that it wasn't some kind of tragedy that happened besides something material. But they lost the set. They lost that set. They lost 2 other sets. They noted that the one set would take a couple weeks to rebuild. The other 2 sets could take 10 to 12 weeks to rebuild. And obviously they weren't done filming. I'm unclear on if they lost film in the fire. I don't think they did. But I don't know either if they were shooting digitally or on film, but I'm pretty sure they were just shooting on film. And it seems like maybe they didn't lose footage, but they lost everything else. I mean, because they have footage of the fire.
That's so crazy.
It's unbelievable. It's so easily could have killed people.
Yeah. But also, if you're doing a House of Wax remake,
you're supposed to feel like you're in a building on fire, and then like, you are in a building on fire.
And the original House of Wax movies like opens with the person being like, "Oh, wax is really flammable.
Yeah,
let's burn down the wax museum to get insurance money."
Right.
How uncanny is it that this accident would happen? And it's like, oh no, we're making House of Wax. Actually,
right.
It just blows my mind. Like, what an accident to happen on set. Really,
it's wild.
It's so wild.
The other thing too is I knew that they had lost a set to fire, but I did not know until I was watching that documentary today, actually, that they lost the set to fire while they were filming, that fire had started while the entire crew and those actors were on site. And if you do watch that documentary, again, nothing to write home about, but if you did want to see like that part with the fire, the footage they have is unbelievable because you see the set go up in flames and then they filmed the entire studio burning down. Like the roof just like exploded, and then once it's all out, it looks like a tornado hit. It looks like a bomb hit. It is just unbelievable, like bent metal everywhere, concrete everywhere, like
devastating.
And then to think too that sometimes I notice continuity issues in stuff, but in this, like in the sets, and it could be just the way it's edited very specifically, but I never picked up on any continuity issues.
No.
Of course, you know, that would be caused by like losing a set.
I didn't either, but this is like getting to the part of the movie where like it's just destruction. Mm-hmm. It's just so much destruction. I assume it'd be like pretty easy to like blend that with another set.
And I wish I knew what the other sets were that they lost. They probably still had more to film in those ones and lost it. Somehow they picked it back up, they rebuilt it, and it seemed like when they went back to set, Chad was very, very uneasy by going back to set, very uneasy by like the fire.
Well, yeah.
And apparently the reason the fire happened, and this was one of the producers, I think, that said this, so who knows? It's very possible they were just operating on an unsafe movie set. Who would be surprised by that? But apparently there was like, under the elevated stage, there was fire retardant everywhere. When the fire was going the way when it was supposed to, it was melting the wax, which was smothering the fire retardant.
Okay, somebody made a huge mistake here. Like whoever was an expert on not having this shit catch fire, they failed so miserably.
It's too late for something like this to happen.
Yeah, well, no, because just a couple years ago, they killed on set from the prop gun having real bullets.
That's horrible.
Yeah, like you don't think stuff like this could happen nowadays, but actually, yes. It can, and it honestly thinks like it comes from a place of like capitalism. People trying to make deadlines, trying to cut corners, save costs, do whatever.
And so I can't remember in waxwork if the museum might burn down. I think it might. We don't really see the wax burning down like we do in House of Wax or other House of Wax. Mm-hmm. So this movie was doing something that probably hadn't been done in decades. Yeah. So how do they do it? How do they do it well? They know what they should have done. It's very possible the corners were just cut, especially the way they treated Jared when he said he didn't want to get sprayed with wax, and they were kind of just like, you gotta do it. Oh my God. But it's so amazing. I am so glad nobody was hurt by that. And I think in the documentary, Alicia says something like, this is what we do for a living. It's not something that we want to give our lives to, which is, I think, what everybody wants. You should feel safe at work. And yeah, this was just a disaster. So this was filmed in Australia. I don't know if there were some like looser precautions taken there. Who knows? In a perfect world, you shouldn't have accidentally burned a Warner Brothers studio down while filming a movie in post Y2K. It just doesn't seem like it's something that should be able to happen, but it did.
God, such a crazy accident.
So
it almost makes me wonder. And here's where my like paranoid brain kicks in, where I'm just like always thinking of different schemes going on. I'm like, what if somebody did this on purpose? They're like, let's do House of Wax for real.
I'll show you House of Wax 1953.
Yeah. We're going to create like a Vincent Price type of character right now.
When I learned that the set had burned down, I honestly thought it was nobody was in it. It burned overnight or something.
Yeah.
Which would make sense if somebody was trying to pull an insurance scheme. But instead, it's just this horrible accident. Everybody was there. If you have a chance, the footage in that documentary, I think that's the only place you could find it. I don't even know if you could find pictures of it. It's unbelievable the way it looks like when the fire is done. Yeah, so that fire happens in the scene where Bo and Nick are like having this violent fight while the museum is burning in the movie and also in real life. But,
it's too much.
I know. Bo finally gets Nick on the ground. Nick kind of saves himself by yanking at the piece of arrow stuck in his chest, which makes him let go of him. Bo does knife Nick in the thigh, and then I think Nick like walks away with it still in his leg. Carly does manage to beat Bo to death with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
And she goes a little overkill with it. It's one of those things where it's definitely over, and she's just going.
Go off, Queen. You've been through a lot. You lost your finger.
Through a lot.
You lost your lips.
You lost.
I get it.
Then Vincent comes in, and at this point, I guess we could note Vincent was, I believe, also played by the same actor that played Bo, but you can't tell obviously because he's in a costume. Yeah. Vincent comes in, sees his dead brother on the ground. He tries to take his revenge on Carly. He starts chasing her upstairs. And then this scene is really cool because they're climbing the stairs, and the stairs are made of wax. So their feet are sinking in like 4 or 5 feet into the wax. And that was happening in real life as they were filming this.
Wow,
like they made it
really?
They made it that way. I did read at one point that There might have been peanut butter in the wax. And sometimes, honestly, it looks a little like mashed potatoes. I don't know if mashed potatoes might have been in it too. I have no idea. But either way, like, you can see their feet sinking into it.
I love
that. That must suck if you had to do a reshoot because they'd have to reset.
It reminds me of like an Exorcist, like kind of like soup, like pea soup kind of vomit thing. Like, I love when they get creative like that with the production.
Yeah, trying to figure out like what substance they use to make it perfect, because it does seem like melting wax. It absolutely does.
It looks so good. It really does.
I was also like in the making of, there were also some clips of like when Nick and Carly were going through the hallway, they had crew pouring hot wax down the walls. That's where the melting wax was coming from on the walls. They had people pouring it down. And at one point, I don't know if somebody drops their bucket, but in the behind the scenes, like Chad gets hit in the head with something that fell. And he throws a fit, which I do not blame him at all, because he should be safe on set like the rest of the actors. There should not be anything dangerous happening. But he literally gets hit in the head with like a wax bucket or something. And he threatens to walk off set on that point because he's had it. He's traumatized, literally traumatized from that fire. Like, I know. I feel so bad for him.
I mean, like, what an undertaking, though, to be like, yeah, I'm going to make a House of Wax movie, and then the whole friggin' set's going to melt.
The whole thing sounds grueling.
What a task to take on. But they pull it off so well. You could tell someone was an absolute tyrant about this.
Yeah.
Making it.
You're right.
Getting all the practical effects. Like, you could tell someone's like, no, we're doing it real. It's got to look real.
When they get upstairs to the bedroom, she's even like running across the bed and her feet are sinking into the bed.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how exhausting that was, because I assume you'd probably have to do a couple takes. It's like trying to walk across a beach with really deep sand. Like, you just can't, or like snow or whatever, but worse, I'm sure.
It's like, you see that the town was being marketed as like a fully waxed town, but for whatever reason, it didn't really cross my mind. They're like, no, the buildings are wax, until I see this melting in like these last few scenes. And I'm like, wow, everything's really wax.
The thing I like in the bedroom too is like Vincent tries to break down the door. She locks herself in there, which I don't know how a door lock works in an entirely 100% wax museum, but whatever.
Right.
And then he pokes his you have a point. He pokes his knife through the door. How's the lock work? I don't know. He like stabs his knife through the door and drags it down, and she had put a crib up against the door with it has two conjoined twin figures in it, and as he's dragging that knife down, it separates those twins, which I just think is a cool touch.
Yes.
So essentially separating him and his brother. And then when he's in the room, she tries to reason with him, and she's, your brother's evil, but you're an artist. Brother mistreated you. But eventually, like, Nick wrestles Vincent down, rips his mask off. Carly rips the knife out of, I think, Nick's thigh, and then Nick holds him so she can stab him, which is very nice of him, I think.
You see them, like, this is like where they repair their whatever is going on in their relationship, where they're like, they've grown a bond through this. They've gotten over whatever conflicts they had with each other. They can get together to murder this guy.
Yeah. We see like the floors falling apart. Everything's on fire. Also, an interesting thing to think about, how long this fire went on in the movie. But in real life, that entire set was up in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, it was up immediately. It was immediately spreading, but this fire is just burning pretty slow. But anyway,
it's like a slow melting candle.
It is. We see some CGI effects here, green screen stuff, like through the floor. Like, the floor looks like lava at some point. But all in all, a lot of that is practical, which is so cool. They eventually can't find a door, so they just start digging through the wall to get out.
So good.
And they climb through the sign, basically, and the building collapses, and they kind of slip and slide out of the building.
Is it a House of Wax sign? Like, does the sign say House of Wax?
They push the A out of the wax and start climbing out.
Oh, I love that so much.
Nick leads her away. Then we're fast forwarded to daytime. The town's full of emergency vehicles. And this part was kind of just funny to me, because I was, wow, like, you really realize how small the cast was and how much time you spend with each character. Finally, all of a sudden, there's a bunch of extras moving around. Like,
and you see those like little wax streams flowing through the town down the streets. It's so good.
And it kind of looks like dirty snow or something.
Yeah.
It's weird. We get some more background info from the cop. He says, like, the town's been abandoned for 10 years since the sugar mill shut down. Town's no longer on the map. Nick wanted Dalton's camera, but it was in an evidence bag. And he couldn't get it, but he does eventually steal it, which is good. Because what evidence are they going to get off that camera? Like, they know these guys are killers. The guys are dead. They don't need the camera. Let the guy have his memories. Like, they also say the only reason they knew to respond was because they could see all the smoke from the fire. The first responders are taking pictures of the evidence and the bodies. And then we get this dramatic call. The sheriff is told by a coworker that Trudy didn't have 2 sons. She had 3.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then on the way out, that roadkill guy waves with like Bo or Vincent's dog, or maybe it was his dog, seemingly implying he is the third brother, maybe.
Yeah.
And then we get the My Chem needle drop. Part I have a grudge about is I feel like that last line was trying so hard to set up a sequel, and then there was never a sequel made. To be opening the door there, and then it never happened.
I don't know if it was setting up a sequel or just throw one last little twist in there.
True. I felt like it could have been a setup for a sequel. But yeah, that's House of Wax. 5 out of 5 stars.
Oh, yeah. Incredible. Not much in common with the original, or what people assume the original, the 1954 one, except I feel like some of the character names were not, like Vincent.
Vincent, like Vincent Price.
And so yeah, the 2 leads in the 1954 movie House of Wax is Vincent Price and Carly Jones.
Have you ever been to a wax museum? And if so, which wax museums?
I have not been to a wax museum. What's the big one in New York City? Madame Tussauds?
Yeah.
Tussauds, something like that. Me and Trisha went to New York City last year.
But you didn't go to the wax museum?
We wanted to go in. We walked in because we were walking around New York City, and we're like, oh crap, it'd be so cool to go in there. So we went in. It was like $100 to $200 for a ticket, and we were just like, no. Yeah, but that's the one in like Times Square, so yeah, everything's marked up there. But I've never been, but I really want to go, especially the one you were telling me about.
Somehow I've been to 4 different wax museums. I don't know how or why. So the first wax museum I was ever at was in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and it was the Hall of the Presidents. So it was a wax museum of all the presidents, and I believe it was maybe during Obama's term, so I can't remember if they had Obama made or not, but they definitely had like George W. Bush made. So it was, this is like 2007, 8, 9-ish that I was there. I remember like they didn't move or anything, but you could press a button and they'd start talking, some of them.
That's awesome.
And then upstairs was kind of cool because they had wax figures of all the first ladies, but they were like 1/4 size instead of life size. But it was still pretty cool. Like they had very cool like dresses and clothing, and everybody in the wax museum like looked correct. Like it wasn't like a shady wax museum with bad artistry. Like it was good looking. It was good looking wax figures.
I gotta visit that because I've been going to Gettysburg.
That one closed.
Oh no, I was gonna say, I'm like, I don't know how that flew under my radar because I went to Gettysburg like the last 4 years in a row and I've never seen anything for that. That's so sad.
It is closed. It closed like I want to say 8 years ago or so, and I think they auctioned off the pieces. I'm pretty sure. I've been to 2 in Salem. In Salem, there's one of the witch museums has like wax dioramas of scenes in Salem, like historic scenes. That one's kind of a funny one because those ones are like really they're worse for wear for sure.
No.
Like their wigs are all messed up. Like
that's great.
And then I think that one also just kind of has a reputation of being another part of like sensationalized Salem rather than actual historic tragic Salem. Then in the same town, there is, I think it's called Count Orlok's. It's kind of just one big room and it's pretty small, but it has, I would say at least a dozen figures, but it has figures from horror movies. For some reason, the only one I distinctly remember is one of the witches from The Witches.
Oh, awesome.
For some reason, that's the only one I remember, but like, it was definitely well-known stuff, like probably like Dracula and stuff like that. But that was okay. Highly, 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 I recommend House of Frankenstein in Lake George, New York. That place is amazing.
I think my mom's doing her birthday at Lake George this year.
Nice.
She was just
you guys will have to go.
We usually go to Lake George every year too, because we have family in upstate New York, so we do like cruise or something, like a little dinner
That's so
cruise.
cool.
So I'll definitely make sure I stop it and check it out. I was watching that video you sent me of the walkthrough of House of Frankenstein. Oh my god, it looks so good.
Yeah, if anybody's interested, you could definitely find walkthroughs on YouTube. It's like on the main street in Lake George, I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah, I know what
it's
you're
definitely
talking about.
like surrounded by other businesses, restaurants and stuff. Remember going on a trip there, and I had that on my list. There's kind of funny reviews of it where people really complain about it.
What?
Personally, I think it's amazing. The complaints were like, "Oh, this is outdated," but
what?
you know me, I'm all about it. I'm all about the outdated stuff.
Yeah, like
there's kind of like loud, creepy music and like sound effects playing the whole time. And you enter this wood paneled hallway and it's dark. It's real dark. And then you start looking through these plexiglass windows at dioramas. Some of the dioramas are animated, like the creature from the Black Lagoon pops in and out of a hole.
It reminds me of like a haunted house walkthrough.
It was very much like a haunted house, but like, you know, they were wax figures, and I'm not 100% sure if every single one was a wax figure, but they definitely had wax figures from the 60s and 70s in there. There's like the creature, and you could push buttons to make stuff happen. So the one, you're looking at Dracula, and then a mirror, you push a button, and it's like a mirror effect where the mirror moves, and then all you see is a bat.
Wow. That's awesome.
I'm trying to think what else is in there. There's all the traditional like horror guys, but then you kind of get into this part that has murder and torture scenes. I would like to note that back 120 years ago and at the World's Fairs and in New York City, like the most popular thing about wax museums is they often depicted torture scenes and murders.
Yeah,
because
that's the thing. That's what people wanted. The people wanted to see that. They wanted to see like Jack the Ripper murdering someone on the streets of London.
Exactly. This is a short tangent, but one of my close friends was doing family tree research and she found out she was related to this family that almost everybody had been killed with axes in the 1800s.
Oh my
except
god.
one or two people that the descendants came from. But
oh my
when
god.
I was looking, I know it's a wild story. I visited their graves actually. They have giant headstones. When I was researching that murder, because it was given like this sensationalized name, which I don't want to mention it on the podcast, but if you really want to know, you can ask me. It was given like this sensationalized name, and when I was searching on newspapers.com just to find if I could find some info, I learned that murder was a scene advertised in one of the New York City wax museums in the late 1800s.
Oh wow.
That murder scene, it is a diorama scene, but I mean that museum burned down in the 1920s, so it no longer exists. But people were all about that.
I mean, like that must have been the inspo for the original House of Wax movies, because the curator of these wax places in these movies, like he ends up murdering people and like recreating the scenes in his museum. So he's like making content, but also using the bodies in the actual displays, which is just wild.
You know, one thing that's kind of interesting is in the original House of Wax, like it happens, Vincent Price's character, he's physically disabled by, I guess, the fire.
Yeah, he's like disfigured. I guess he pretends to be disabled.
The kind of the story with that is that he couldn't make proper looking wax figures anymore because his hands didn't have the function, so that they were made out of people. But in House of Wax, it's constantly remarked about how Vincent is such a great artist. So it's like the complete opposite situation.
I feel like, I don't know how true that is, because like he gets up and walks around and murders people. So I mean,
but that's like the story. That's the story they allegedly give.
Yeah.
Like that's the reasoning they cite.
That could be like a smokescreen making him seem like crippled. He can't do much because he lost the ability to function. But just so he could get away with actually, I think it's like a revenge, like a tale of revenge too, because like in the beginning of the movie, they're pushing him to make more displays of like gruesome murders, and he's like, no, like that's cheap, I don't want to do that. So this might be like a little fuck you, be like, oh, you want me to make murder displays? I'll make murder displays.
It is so interesting. Really what fueled the wax museum was just scenes of murder and torture. This wax museum, House of Frankenstein, I think they opened in the late 60s or early 70s, and there's absolutely pieces in there that are that old. Personally, they're my favorite. There's literally medieval torture wheels, like stretching tables, stuff like that. There's one that is just stuck in my head. It's animated, so a lot of these are animated, which is so cool. It's this woman in a bathtub that I think is full of blood, and this person has an axe and they're dismembering her, and the animation is them picking up the axe and then thumping it down, and then picking up the axe and thumping it down.
Wow.
I would say like half of it is probably known figures and kind of fun, spooky scenes, and then the other half is literally just very dark stuff.
Like a haunted house for true crime fanatics.
It is, and I have to laugh at it because, like, obviously that stuff's not funny, but I mean, we all like horror movies, so we're at least a little bit gross. It's funny how people never really change either. I think we actually are pivoting away from that kind of stuff, whereas 100 years ago, like, people would pay a penny to see anything. Yeah. Oh, you need to see a conjoined twin? Here you go. You need to see some tortured wax figures? There we go. But
I kind of see a parallel to that in what's going on now with all these true crime YouTubes and things like that, or like podcasts. Yeah, there's still a big market for people profiting off of the morbid curiosity that other people have about true crime. There's so much money in it.
There is.
I mean, look at all these YouTube stars. There's just skyrocketed popularity. Like the one lady does her makeup while she talks about it, and the other lady like eats dinner while she talks about it. And it's like,
oh my God, I haven't seen that one. I mean, I don't look for these, but I wasn't aware of. I was aware of the makeup one, but not the other.
Yeah, the one lady eats food while she talks about it.
Jesus. People do a lot of separating in their mind to make those things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Before I got into horror movies, I would watch like CSI with my mom. CSI really does have some gnarly stuff in there. Even before I got into horror movies, I really liked 6 Feet Under, which also has some gnarly death scenes. Also growing up, I would watch Dateline and stuff. As I get older, honestly, sometimes Dateline is the least evil in the equation compared to the way some people, quotation mark, report on true crime. I distance myself from it, but at the same time, like, I fully indulge in horror because it's not real. It's not real. I mean, sure, maybe it's similar to certain things, but I don't have that worry in my head where I'm like, this feels unethical or this feels weird. Like, it's a safe way to see those things that scare you. I think a lot of women are drawn to true crime because we're kind of always on alert.
Absolutely.
Wondering what the worst thing that could happen to us. And I think by women consuming true crime, it's almost like an exercise in what's the worst thing that could happen. I'm seeing it play out in front of me.
Like, how do I prepare myself from this potentially happening to me?
Right. And I think that's why it's so widespread for women. But that's kind of how horror movies are for me. Like, I can release that scared part of myself watching these things play out because it's just a safe zone.
Absolutely. And statistically speaking, women have to deal with a lot more like threats of physical violence towards them.
Mm-hmm.
I think with true crime too, whatever's happened to me, I'm still here. It could have been worse. That's the part where it could be comforting sometimes. I know some people are like, they don't understand like how things like horror movies or listening to true crime to be comforting, but for me, I feel a comfort knowing I'm never gonna get trapped with a murderer in a building made of wax melting.
I will never let some guy glue your lips shut.
Yeah. Exactly. There's a level of comfort there. Like, you're seeing this horrifying thing, no shot this is gonna happen.
I do think true crime stuff is really salacious sometimes. I think it's like unethical. I think it's pretty awful a lot of the time, but at the same time, I can see where the fascination comes from and the uncontrollable need for people to know more.
Yeah.
Because people have been in dire situations or are worried about being in dire situations, and that's just a way to process it. I guess. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a weirdo, but
no, I think there's something to that, definitely.
And I fucking love Negan, but I didn't like Negan until he started to try and kind of turn a page. Like when him
Negan.
Well, you do hate him for a long time. I hated him for a long time.
I know.
But
there was never redemption for me with Negan. Like, I'm just like, you should have died a couple seasons ago, bud. I don't know what you're.
And I know there's no real redemption, but if you kind of push that on the back burner, he saves Judith a couple times, very kind to Judith, and then it does seem like he tries to be apologetic. Obviously, it's fantasy, it's fiction. No person in real life is ever going to act that way. Somebody that's capable of that kind of violence is never, ever, ever going to be capable of that kind of turnaround.
Absolutely. They might
not to be a downer, but
no, it's true. It's true. They're big fat phonies, pretenders. They might act like they, have that capacity, but it's never the case like that.
I love Jaime Lannister as a character because he's super, super evil. But then you realize the thing that he was the most heavily criticized about, which was like killing the king, you realize he killed the king to protect people in the long run. Obviously, there's no coming back from him pushing a child out of the window and causing them to be paralyzed, but he does, as time goes on, like he does kind of start to care about people. He does care about the Stark daughters and what happens to them. He seems to care about Brienne and helping her find them. When you also just look at his tragedy, like his tragedy is that he's in an abusive, incestuous relationship.
Very dynamic.
But I love his character because I like his journey. And again, it's not a blueprint. It's never going to be real life, but I just love a redemption arc. In horror, we don't get a redemption arc.
No, not all the time.
Bo just gets like put down in the wax museum, and that's fine because he's evil. So.
Right. It's the whole like formulaic thing with this movie too.
Right.
It works in this situation, but I do love a good, well-rounded, like dynamic character as well. Mm-hmm. If there was another House of Wax movie coming out, like, well, how would you like to see that go?
Ooh, that is such a good question. Do you have your answer for that ready?
I do.
Okay, yes. You tell me first, and then I'll think about it.
So what got me thinking about this was I watched the original Mystery of the Wax Museum from 1933. I would like to see something more like that. The lead was a woman journalist, and she's really spunky, and she's kind of an alcoholic, and it's got like this really awesome like noir vibe. She's in this city in the 1920s investigating this like suicide or supposed murder. So I would love to see like a noir thriller kind of like crime movie about it, but with a very eccentric character as the curator or the artist, whatever, like kind of like a Vincent Price kind of eccentric, like maybe even a comedian playing that role. But I wish they would do another spunky woman journalist trying to prove herself, or
So when you say like that character's saying that character is like an alcoholic,
the journalist, she like that's the vibe I got. She was like drunk in the movie and like hungover, like investigating.
So I love that for her. Yeah. I mean, I want her to get better, but like my thing is like it's very good narratively when women are allowed to be not perfect.
Yeah.
In 1933, that was probably unreal. To have that kind of character, because even now most female characters have to be good and presentable. I can only think of a few female characters that are allowed to be messy and controversial. I don't know, I always cite like Shiv from Succession as one of those characters because she's just as bad as everybody else, but she still has so much depth to her. And she's just a character that's allowed to be messy. She's allowed to be messed up. She's allowed to be like critical and mean and shitty and whatever. I just like when a lady character is allowed to do bad things, because it does not happen often, even in the year of our Lord 2024.
Yeah,
it does not happen.
I was so surprised to see that in a movie from the 1930s. Right. You had this awesome female lead. So the remake from the 1950s with Vincent Price, it's more or less the same movie as the 1930s movie, except the lead is unemployed. She's not a journalist. She's unemployed, and she's just scared all the time. They like really leaned into like the 1950s, like, no, you gotta be a housewife. You can't have a job. They got rid of that. And I'm like, why?
I think the movie you watched, that 1930, I think that was like a pre-code movie. So there were things in that movie that would not have flew in the 40s or 50s in a movie. So it's fun to think about what they were able to do in that movie that 10 short years later, you could not.
Yeah, no, there was some like drug use in the movie that they definitely had to cut out in the 50s one.
I think a lot of people have a very sterilized view of the past where they legitimately think that things were truly different, things were better, nothing bad was happening. I think most of the reason that we as a society think that is because people use films as a primary source to process the past, not realizing that for a chunk of, forgive me if I'm off on this, but however many decades like the Hays Code lasted, could not have been in those movies. So that's why we have this sterilized view of the past, because you were not seeing it on screen. People my grandparents' age growing up were not going to the theater to see a movie like the one from 1933 that you watched. You were seeing a very sterilized version of it. Frightens me because as time goes on, the internet becomes more and more censored, and the internet used to be a place you wouldn't be censored, and now like I find myself censoring my language on Instagram so nothing gets taken down. Like I'm in like a cartoon chat room in 2001.
It's rough. You get banned. Yeah, it's like you never know what's gonna get you banned. You never know. It could be anything. It's so crazy. The censorship is ridiculous.
And then with like people kind of sliding back against like sex scenes and whatnot, I just hope that that doesn't push us into some kind of rule with entertainment where you can't show certain things now. I feel like we just passed this sweet spot of about 25 years from the mid-90s to relatively currently, where finally American-made movies were showing whatever. They were not, they were not holding anything back. And I fear that we're on a backslide back to something more sterilized.
I think so, because when you look at the horror movies from the 70s and all the nipples and things, like you're not... But then again, like, do you have better rights now as far as like, well, like what are you comfortable showing and what are you comfortable doing? It's not so much like, oh, like you need to do this because sex sells.
I'm obviously very, very much a proponent for like people need to be advocated for on set. That's why we have the coordinator now. That's why that's a thing. And that's why Jared Padalecki in House of Wax should have had someone advocating for him when he was saying he did not want to be covered in wax. But I think that stuff should never stump up a story, but it never will. Yeah. Unless it becomes outlawed. But it never will, just because you can always use a body double. You can always slightly change something while retaining that, whatever that shock is you want to retain. So it's not going to change unless it starts becoming to be not allowed for some reason, which is a terrifying thought to me.
It really is. It really is. Have you given any thought what kind of movie? House of Wax movie? Would you do a sequel to the 2005 movie?
Oh, but Bo's dead. He's dead.
I know. Just this like weird potential third it is like he's not going to cut it as a main villain.
No, he's not.
He's not.
Unless Bo is actually identical to Vincent, and Vincent was the one killed in the wax museum, and Bo is in the... Oh, but Vincent was killed anyway. Never mind. There's no way to bring Bo back from this.
There's always ways. There's always ways. I don't know about that. I think there's always a way to be like, wow.
It's true. Some horror sequels have really made a leap to resurrect a character for the purpose of a sequel. But
yeah, maybe they could like the beginning could be like, oh wait, there's one more live one, and you see him like wheeling someone out. Be like the wax sealed up the wound. I don't know.
The wax helped him regenerate his face.
He's now 50% wax, 50% person.
So for me, House of Wax hits a lot of my favorite tropes. One of my favorite all-time horror genres is just the blanket, like, daylight horror, camp horror, woods horror, backwoods horror, evil rednecks, stuff like that. Like that hits so many notes for me. Like I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love this movie. I love stuff like The Burning and certain Friday the 13th. Just so many things like that. I don't know why. I think it's because I love summer so much, so I really just want to be watching a movie. Like, and The Hills Have Eyes is like another one that has a lot of daylight in it. So unfortunately, this movie is nearly a perfect movie for me because it just hits so many of those notes that I love. If I could go back in time, stop this movie from being made, and then have it be made either now or in the short future better, even though it's very, very good. Better than it possibly could have ever been.
Do you think they could get away with using so many practical effects now if it was made now?
I honestly don't think they would, and I really think that scene that caused that place to catch on fire, that condition of that set, the way that stuff was built, I do not think that would be any kind of passable set for people, right? Like in the current period of time. That would have been stopped. That would not be happening.
Unfortunately, but also very fortunately.
But I don't know, if I was going to redo House of Wax, I'm trying to think like what Wax Museum movies have covered and what I would like to see them cover. And I don't know. I do like the anthology aspect of wax work.
Maybe like a haunted house type of Wax Museum slasher.
But I feel like that's Tourist Trap.
Oh yeah. Let's just get the Tourist Trap remake.
I would love to see an official Tourist Trap remake. I really would. Even more than like, I mean, maybe eventually down the road there could be a 2005 House of Wax remake, but I would love to actually see a direct Tourist Trap remake. Maybe not exactly direct, but very similar, and maybe just add more elements to it. I love the road trip, woodsy, camping, backwoods vibe of House of Wax, and Tourist Trap has that too. Like they even go swimming in a waterfall at one point, and it looks so nice.
Yeah.
And I would just hope it would like include that. Oh, and like another movie I love, I don't care what anybody says, I love Texas Chainsaw: The Next Generation. And that's just another like weird backwoods killer movie. But I would love to like take those vibes and take the Tourist Trap vibes and whatever. If somebody makes a movie like that, I'll go see it. I don't care if it seems like it'll be bad. I'll go see it.
I would see that too. That sounds like a good mixture right there.
Also, like the other thing I was thinking about, Paris Hilton was at the height of her fame then, and she couldn't possibly get any more famous, so she kind of like went down in fame, but she's still obviously pretty much a billionaire. I don't think she's a billionaire, but she's she's a millionaire. Then I was also thinking about how Jared Padalecki, shortly after House of Wax, was when he started Supernatural, and then that was his steady job for 15 years straight. Aside from a couple movies here and there, like he was in the Friday the 13th remake, which I actually haven't seen, but that was his steady job for 15 years. So he did and does really well for himself. And I don't even think it was because of House of Wax, you know what I mean? Like I think he was already cast in Supernatural. I think he was in like that Walker Texas Ranger remake. But then like Chad Michael Murray, I feel like he kind of fell off the radar.
He really did.
He was in Riverdale.
He really did.
He played a dad in Riverdale.
Oh my god.
Which really hurt me. Even though he's more than old enough to be the dad of a high schooler, more than old enough, but it still hurt me.
That's a rough one. But I wonder if the growing popularity of the 2005 House of Wax in the later years has contributed to Jared Padalecki's like cult status with the fandom of Supernatural and how that's grown over the years. Where like they just want to consume everything with Jared Padalecki in it.
That's true. People definitely, I feel like, dug into his whole movie history and Jensen's because of that. I think Supernatural was always popular since the beginning, and there's just this wild, strong fan base. Man, the Supernatural convention I went to was like
yeah, they've got one of the most intense fan base I've ever seen. It was haunting. Yeah.
I loved it though. It was great. We're about 30. I'm 31, you're like 30. But obviously when Supernatural came out, there were people that are our age now that were watching it. So a lot of the people at the convention were like nearly my parents' age. Because that's how old Supernatural is. And it's wild to think about. The other wild thing is like Supernatural hit the air like less than 5 years after the X-Files ended, which is bananas. It just blows my mind. Like
it just is a good time to like scratch that itch that X-Files, maybe like that emptiness that it left behind in a lot of people.
Yeah, and Supernatural is definitely geared towards a different audience, but formulaically, I think it's very comparable to the X-Files. Also, they do share Mitch Pileggi. He plays Skinner in the X-Files, but he also plays the grandfather of Dean and Sam in Supernatural.
Oh, wow. Supernatural's one of those shows I just couldn't get into.
See, I couldn't get into it because it would be running on TV all the time, and I'd try to watch an episode and couldn't get into it, but it's one of those things you have to watch and get a feel for. And the thing that attracted me to it was it's just so smart and funny. Like there's so many references, like they make references to horror movies and music, at least in the first 5 seasons. The rest of the seasons are kind of dramatized story episodes, but those first few seasons are gold.
You know what I think's holding me back? I think I figured it out. It's
what is it?
I've just got like a bias. Men just give me the ick. In general. Hear me out. I love X-Files. Like, I love the Gillian Anderson's character. You know, I feel like it's too much of a sausage fest.
Like, so Supernatural 100% I feel is made for people who like men.
Yeah, and I do not. I'll admit that. I do not like men. I have a therapist. We talk about it. I have a boyfriend. He's great. Love him. I don't like men. I just don't.
Just, like, Supernatural, I feel like was never geared towards a teenage boy. Like, it's always been geared towards women or other people that like men. Like, I feel like it's just geared towards people that would be like, oh, Dean and Sam are so hot. Nothing wrong with that, because Dean and Sam are hot, and it's a great show.
No, but, and I hate that about the show. I hate that.
I know, it's a strange marketing decision, because it really is like this paranormal anthology is based off of like, hey, you tired of Mulder and Scully? Well, here's two dudes.
No, sorry guys.
I understand though. I mean, women are underrepresented in everything. Women are definitely underrepresented in Supernatural. I still think it's funny. But
if I didn't have this man hatred in my brain, I would absolutely love that show, Supernatural. I would. I know it. I know I would. It's holding me back.
All right. Well, any final thoughts? I don't know if I have any final thoughts.
I really enjoyed going down this rabbit hole with you. The House of Wax saga was a lot bigger than I expected, but I love that. It's great. I encourage anyone to go down this rabbit hole too. It's some really great stuff. A lot of different types of movies and themes and things, but very enjoyable.
It's interesting to think about how we were citing so many things that happened before House of Wax, but I feel like I can't really cite anything post 2005 House of Wax. We're far enough away. Maybe there will be another Wax Museum movie on the horizon. I'm sure there's been some, but there hasn't, in my point of view, hasn't been any that have really come across my radar.
Have a good night, guys.
Yeah, goodbye.
Bye.
May your DVDs never be scratched.
May your VCR never be hungry.
May the film reel never break.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for more.